Okay, so next up, we are main slides. And we're going to just connect this to the building blocks of programming. So those flowcharts, you saw already some of these things. What we call sequencing, selection, and iteration are three extremely common tools, but also really three common algorithmic tools or problem-solving tools of doing things and in a specific sort of solution-oriented way, right? So sequencing, just that vocabulary word that refers to doing the steps in a specific order. So we absolutely just did that right there for the flowchart by connecting them with arrows in a specific order. That was sequencing. Making decisions based on some criteria, that's what we call selection, okay? So every one of those diamonds was a decision block or a selection where we said, is my count less than number of sugars? If yes, do this one thing. Else, if not, do this other thing. Those were examples of selection. Okay. And the third common one is to repeat specific steps multiple times, and that's what we call iteration or looping. Okay. So iteration, repetition, and again, we saw that technically, if the count was less, we had to do that. Maybe if number of sugars was like 5 times, we might have to repeat that loop 5 times in a row, right? If they said only 1 sugar, then we wouldn't have to repeat it. We would just have to do it once, right? But depending on that criteria, depending on that condition of whether the count was less than number of sugars, we would repeat it multiple times. Okay, so look for those. We're going to look more next week at the specific pseudocode related to those, like if-else statements and for loops, while loops, repeat until loops, and all of those good things. But start to recognize those terms, sequencing, selection, and iteration. And for that, I actually have a little bit of practice. I'm going to skip that one and move to this one. And I would like you all to read this over and maybe type your answer in the chat when you think you know which one it is. The following computes a maximum score for a list of final exam scores. We initialize a variable max to the first score in the list. For each score in the list, compare the score to max. If the score is greater than max, store the score in max. And at the end, we return that maximum. So here is our list of like 3, 1, and 7. Our goal is to find the maximum 7. Note that there might be multiple answers to this question. Do you see selection in here? Do you see iteration? Do you see sequencing? Or none of the above? So type in the chat which of those 3 techniques you see. Okay, a couple of people saying iteration. Good, good, good. Keep going, everybody. Selection, says Heather. Great. Okay, selection. Okay, sequencing, iteration, all 3. A. Okay, good, good, good. Thank you all for participating there in the chat. So one of you who said selection, can you unmute yourself and say out loud, where did you see selection occurring? In what specific parts of that algorithm?
Right, Joe.
So initialize a variable max to the first score in the list.
I don't think that is selection. I do think there is selection there, but let's just
I was going to say,
go back to the definition of selection, making a decision, making a decision. So usually when we think selection, that's like an if something is true, if some criteria is true, do this, okay? So do you see selection there anywhere? Mike, you were going to say something?
yeah, where it says if score is greater than max.
Yeah, so there's the criteria, there's the condition, if whether the score is bigger than the maximum number right now. And if it is, we do this thing right here. we store the score in max. If it isn't, we just do nothing, right? So there's no else in that example. But yes, that's making a decision based on a criteria. That is selection, yes. So there's absolutely selection there. And Michelle typed that in the chat, comparing the score to the max. Yes, okay. Okay, iteration. Do you see it? One of you who wrote that you saw iteration. Where do you see that?
That you're going back for each of the different scores in the list?
Yeah, so we're repeating multiple times for each score on the list. Remember, iteration is just a fancy word for repetition, right? So yes, for each score on the list, we go back and do it again. We compare it again and again. And yes, iteration is absolutely there. Okay, so for one of you who said sequencing, what do you see, where do you see sequencing in this?
I mean, it does stuff in order.
Okay, yeah, right? Step 1, step 2, step 2A for each score, right? Then step 3, doing them in order. That is absolutely sequencing. So yes, I would completely agree. All 3 of these are here.
But wouldn't sequencing refer to putting the scores in order?
I would call that sorting. Sorting as a technique for accomplishing that goal. By sequencing, I'm referring to the programming technique of putting the steps in order, or the algorithm in doing things in a specific order. Yeah. Okay. So there's one more example on the next slide that I would encourage you all to check out and think about that. But just for timing, I do want us to move along to what's next. So check this out when you get a chance.